On August 14th, 1945, Times Square exploded in joy. Thousands of Americans celebrated the announcement of Japan's surrender. The war was over. But how did we get here? The United States didn't just win World War II, it reshaped it. And the path was filled with some of the most decisive, dramatic, and world-changing moments in modern history. A Harvard study published just a few years ago ranked the top 5 most pivotal moments of U.S. military history. 4 of them were in World War II. That's not a coincidence. It was the war that turned the U.S. into a global superpower. Let's break down the most decisive moments. The ones that didn't just alter the course of the war, but also changed America forever. Before December 7th, 1941, the United States was largely isolationist. The war raged in Europe and Asia, but America stayed out. Then came a morning that changed everything. At 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, Japanese aircraft bombed the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. 2,403 Americans were killed. Battleships were sunk, aircraft destroyed. But perhaps the biggest casualty was America's neutrality, a date which will live in infamy. The very next day, Congress declared war on Japan. Within days, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. The sleeping giant was now fully awake, and the war became truly global. Just 4 months after Pearl Harbor, America struck back in a way no one expected. Led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, 16 B-25 bombers launched from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet in a daring air raid on Tokyo and other Japanese cities. It was a symbolic mission, militarily limited, but psychologically massive. Japan had believed it was invulnerable. This changed that. The raid shocked Japan and gave the American public something it desperately needed: hope. The Doolittle raid forced Japan to shift strategy and ultimately set the stage for the next major turning point. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy faced Japan near the tiny atoll of Midway. Outnumbered and outgunned, the U.S. relied on intelligence and daring. Thanks to codebreakers, the U.S. anticipated Japan's moves. In just a few days, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk, crippling their naval strength. Admiral Nimitz called it the most stunning and decisive blow in the history of naval warfare. Midway didn't just stop Japanese expansion, it reversed it. From that moment, Japan was on the defensive, and the U.S. began its long push across the Pacific. Meanwhile, in Europe, the war had reached a boiling point. Nazi Germany had tightened its grip on the continent, but that grip was about to be broken. Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, was the largest amphibious invasion in military history. Over 156,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. Nearly 73,000 were Americans. Facing heavy gunfire, landmines, and brutal terrain, U.S. troops stormed Omaha and Utah beaches. We knew we had to go. There was no turning back. The success of D-Day opened a Western front against Nazi Germany. Within a year, Hitler was dead, Berlin was in ruins, and Europe was being liberated. Just when the Allies thought the war in Europe was winding down, Hitler launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. The goal: split the Allied forces and recapture Antwerp. Caught off guard, American troops faced the full force of Germany's last major offensive. The small Belgian town of Bastogne became the symbol of American resilience. Surrounded and outnumbered, the 101st Airborne Division dug in and refused to surrender. When the Germans demanded surrender, General McAuliffe responded with one word: nuts. The U.S. held the line. Reinforcements arrived, and the German offensive collapsed. It was their last gasp. While the army pushed through Europe, the Marines fought a different kind of war on tiny islands across the Pacific. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, each name etched in blood and memory. These weren't just battles. They were brutal, grinding fights in hellish conditions. That image, 6 Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima, became one of the most iconic photos in U.S. history. Over 6,800 Americans died taking that one island. But these victories brought U.S. forces closer and closer to Japan's mainland. While battles raged, a secret project was underway. In labs from Los Alamos to Oak Ridge, some of the world's greatest scientists were building something unprecedented: the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki was hit. Over 100,000 were killed instantly. The world had changed overnight. Japan surrendered soon after. World War II was over. The U.S. had not only won the war, it had entered the nuclear age. But the story doesn't end with victory overseas. The most lasting impact might have come once the troops returned. The GI Bill, passed in 1944, offered returning servicemen education, housing, and job support. It transformed the U.S. economy, creating the modern middle class, fueling a housing boom, and sending millions to college. More than a military triumph, World War II reshaped America from the inside out. World War II didn't just transform foreign policy, it sparked social change too. Over 1 million Black Americans served in segregated units. The Tuskegee Airmen flew over 15,000 missions. The 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, fought bravely in Europe. Their heroism fueled the early civil rights movement. In 1948, President Truman desegregated the military. The seeds had been planted during the war. By 1945, the U.S. had the world's most powerful military, the largest economy, and, thanks to the Marshall Plan, a leading role in rebuilding Europe and Japan. The war catapulted America from inward-focused isolation to global leadership. The Cold War loomed, but there was no doubt the 20th century would be the American century. From Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima, from the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, these weren't just military campaigns. They were moments that forged a nation, defined a generation, and shaped the world we live in today. History isn't made by chance. It's made by choices, by sacrifice, and by moments that change everything.